So let's touch on Versus Wrecking Crew for a bit. This is an arcade version of a Nintendo game. A Nintendo game you could play at home if you had an NES. But if you didn't have an NES, you could play this thing and get, well, actually this game's quite different from the home version. And that might give it some value in terms of the Arcade Archives re-release on Nintendo Switch. Okay, quick refresher course. Wrecking Crew was a game where you climbed up and down ladders, clearing the board of all the walls with your hammer, all the while avoiding the various monsters and fireballs lurking on the level. It's more of a puzzle game than anything if you look at it in a certain way, but was nonetheless a fun little game and even had a little level editor where you could build up to 4 custom levels that you couldn't save unless you were playing this on the Famicom Disk System or Virtual Console equivalent. Versus Wrecking Crew follows a similar premise, but it's not quite the same game. For one thing, everything is confined to a single screen as opposed to the vertical scrolling action of the NES original. And instead of Foreman Spike being your rival in certain levels, you now have a purple-garbed Luigi on every level, thus giving you a rival to contend with, and giving us a game in the Versus line of NES to arcade conversions that actually lives up to the moniker. As such, you're getting a somewhat different game from the NES game, but is it actually better? Meh. Much like the home version, Versus Wrecking Crew has simple controls. You use the stick to move Mario or Luigi around, and both buttons wield a hammer that is used to break stuff and open doors that lead monsters to the background, where they become a harmless shadow. Well, harmless to you, that is. In reality, Versus Wrecking Crew was one of those dual-screen games where each player had their own screen, and so the door was basically a gateway between your side of the playfield and your opponent's. So if you played your cards right, you could open the door to lead the monsters to the other side and basically screw over the other player, or vice versa, which makes the two-player game, played either via this split-screen setup or local connection between two Switch systems, a bit more intense in theory. In a single-player game, however, the monsters harmlessly move over to the other side when they enter an open door and makes life easier for you since CPU-controlled Luigi is more interested in knocking you to the ground level or screwing up your wall chaining abilities than trying to clear his board of monsters. If anything, the bombs that are used to initiate chain reactions of exploding walls for bonus points are the bigger threat, as detonating a bomb opens all the doors on the screen, and if any shadow pops by an open door, they jump back to your side and, well, back to the drawing board, I suppose. Beyond that, your only real threats in Versus Wrecking Crew on the single-player front are the looming monsters, the occasional fireball that shoots out on the floor you're on, and the ever-dwindling time limit which, if it runs out, will not only cost you a life but also erases your progress on the board, forcing you to play the whole board all over again. In contrast, losing a life via contact with a monster or fireball merely causes you to respawn at the bottom without resetting the level, a stark difference between the NES version that makes life a tad easier, but not by much. In terms of adjusting between home and arcade versions, Versus Wrecking Crew pretty much plays the same way despite the compact and competitive nature of this new format. Control works well enough for a game of this ilk, the level layouts lend themselves to a more faster pace of play. You still have the bonus stages every couple levels for bonus points where you're looking for the coin. And honestly, whether it's a one-player go-for-it points approach or the two-player competitive edge, it's a fun little romp that challenges players, if nothing else, with its multitude of screens and layouts. Like with a lot of these hamster releases, you could adjust the difficulty, the number of lives, and these sort of things. And you have a caravan mode and high score mode, which, they're things that exist. And some people might get some mileage out of them. I never really did, but they're there for those who want it, I suppose. Versus Wrecking Crew retains the NES quality graphics for the overall visual presentation. Save for some slight color variations, everything looks like it's been ripped from the NES game with some minor differences here and there. That's not necessarily a bad thing because the graphics in the old Wrecking Crew game were pretty good for early era NES. On the flip side, the sound department is a little more silent, no more background tunes during gameplay, and only a couple light jingles here and there. The sound effects are mostly similar to the original home game, and are all you have to greet you in action, for better or worse. Overall, Versus Wrecking Crew is a solid little competitive game that deviates from the puzzle-based nature of the home version to create a suitable title for money-grubbing arcades while retaining the core gameplay that makes it Wrecking Crew. While it's not on the level of a Mario Brothers or a Joust in terms of two-player competitive arcade goodness, it's still a genuinely fun game that's worth a romp for, if nothing else, its uniqueness from the home version.